The chill of the rain couldn't mask the heat of my rage. 21 years. 21 years I'd poured my heart and soul into that company, and there I stood, watching them celebrate my downfall from across the parking lot. They raised their glasses, toasting to a future without me, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside. They thought they had won. They believed they had broken me, permanently. It had been my life's work, building that company from the ground up, brick by metaphorical brick. Late nights, missed holidays, sacrifices I willingly made because I believed in what we were creating. I remembered the early days, the tiny office space, the ramen dinners, the shared dream of building something lasting. We were a family, or so I thought. Paisley, that's my name, and for over 2 decades, I was practically married to that place. I knew every corner, every employee, every client. I nurtured it, protected it, and watched it flourish. Then the new management arrived, a pack of wolves in expensive suits, ready to devour everything we had built. They came in with their fancy degrees and their arrogant attitudes, dismissing years of experience with a wave of their hands. They spoke of restructuring and streamlining, buzzwords that translated to cutting costs and maximizing profits, regardless of the human cost. The atmosphere changed, the camaraderie evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension and fear. Whispers replaced open conversations, smiles became forced, and the joy that had once permeated the office was gone. The axe fell swiftly and without warning. One Monday morning, I was summoned to the CEO's office, a sterile, impersonal space that reeked of ambition and cheap cologne. He didn't even look me in the eye as he delivered the news. "We're going in a different direction," he said, his voice devoid of any empathy. "Your services are no longer required." Just like that, after 21 years of unwavering loyalty, I was dismissed, discarded like a broken toy. They demanded I hand over my company laptop and cell phone immediately. They wanted me gone, erased, as if my contributions had never mattered. The arrogance dripped from every word, every gesture. They were so confident, so sure of their power, they didn't even consider the possibility that I might have something they needed, something they couldn't just take. They didn't know about the lease. The building, their shiny new headquarters, was leased under my name, a detail they had overlooked in their haste to seize control, a detail that was about to become their undoing. The person I trusted most was one of them. My supposed friend, Sarah, had been feeding them information about my every move, whispering doubts in their ears, subtly undermining my position. I saw the smug look on her face as I was escorted from the building, the barely concealed triumph in her eyes. It was then, standing in the rain, jobless and betrayed, that I knew I wouldn't let them get away with it. The anger solidified, hardening into a cold, unwavering determination. They had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated me. They had awakened a force they couldn't possibly comprehend. The rain soaked through my clothes as I walked away from that building, each drop a cold reminder of the reality crashing down around me. 21 years, gone, just like that. The initial shock began to give way to a gnawing fear. How would I pay my bills? What would I tell my family? The thought of facing them, of admitting that I had been so easily discarded, filled me with dread. I drove home in a daze, the familiar route now feeling alien and hostile. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The silence was deafening, amplifying the swirling thoughts in my head. I tried to sleep, but my mind raced, replaying the scene in the CEO's office over and over again. Each time, the words cut deeper. The betrayal felt more acute. I tossed and turned, haunted by the smug faces of my former colleagues, their celebratory cheers echoing in my ears. I got out of bed, unable to bear the torment any longer. I wandered through the apartment, touching familiar objects, trying to ground myself in some semblance of normalcy. But nothing felt the same. Everything was tainted by the stain of their betrayal. I sat down at my computer, hoping to find some solace at work, some way to distract myself from the pain. But the screen remained blank, the cursor blinking mockingly, a constant reminder of my sudden unemployment. The next few weeks were a blur of fruitless job applications and soul-crushing rejection letters. I scoured the internet, networking sites and industry contacts, but to no avail. The market was flooded, and my age, once an asset, now seemed like a liability. The whispers had started. People I knew from the industry, people I thought were friends, suddenly became distant, their smiles strained, their conversations guarded. I could feel the judgment in their eyes, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What had I done to deserve this? The silence from Sarah was deafening. I tried calling her, texting her, but she didn't respond. It was as if I had ceased to exist. The isolation was suffocating, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. My savings dwindled with each passing day, the specter of financial ruin looming large. I started cutting back on expenses, sacrificing small luxuries, then bigger ones. The fear intensified, a cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I considered swallowing my pride and asking my family for help, but the thought was unbearable. I had always been the strong one, the provider, the one who had it all together. To admit defeat, to expose my vulnerability, felt like the ultimate humiliation. I decided to fight back, to prove them wrong, to show them that I wasn't finished. I started researching my legal options, poring over contracts and employment laws. I contacted a lawyer, hoping to find some loophole, some grounds for a lawsuit. But the news was grim. My termination had been technically legal. The company's lawyers had covered all their bases. I felt a surge of anger, a renewed sense of injustice. They had planned this meticulously, anticipating every possible challenge. But I refused to give up. There had to be something I could do, some way to turn the tables. I started digging deeper, delving into the company's financials, scrutinizing every document I could find. I remembered a conversation I had overheard months ago, a hushed discussion about a potential merger, a deal that could make them all millions. I remembered the names, the dates, the key players involved. A glimmer of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the leverage I needed. I began to formulate a plan, a risky, audacious plan that could either restore my life or destroy it completely. The sleepless nights continued, but now they were filled with purpose, with a burning desire for revenge. The anxiety was still there, but it was mixed with a heady sense of anticipation, a feeling that the tide was about to turn. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared to fight, to claw my way back from the brink. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, crushing my spirit. Each rejection, each whispered conversation chipped away at my resolve, leaving me a hollow shell of my former self. I started having nightmares, vivid and disturbing dreams, where I was trapped in the office, surrounded by laughing figures who slowly morphed into monstrous caricatures of my former colleagues. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the feeling of dread lingering long after the dream had faded. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in, suffocating me. I stopped answering the phone, avoiding social media, cutting myself off from the outside world. I spent my days in a haze of despair, moving through the motions of life without any real feeling. Food lost its taste, music its melody, the world its color. I was a ghost, haunting the ruins of my former life. One evening, I found myself standing on my balcony, staring down at the city lights twinkling below. The world seemed so distant, so indifferent to my suffering. A wave of hopelessness washed over me, so powerful it threatened to pull me under. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, fighting back the urge to just let go. The thought of ending it all, of simply ceasing to exist, was a tempting release from the pain. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I thought of my family, of the people who loved me, of the life I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them break me completely. I stumbled back inside, my body trembling. The near miss with oblivion, a stark reminder of how far I had fallen. I needed to change something, anything, to break free from this downward spiral. I started small, forcing myself to get out of bed each morning, to shower, to eat a proper meal. I began taking long walks in the park, breathing in the fresh air, trying to reconnect with the natural world. I re-engaged with my hobbies, dusting off my old art supplies, losing myself in the act of creation. Slowly, Gradually, the fog began to lift. The pain was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. I started to see things more clearly, to understand the situation from a different perspective. I realized that their actions were a reflection of their own insecurities, their own greed, their own lack of character. They had tried to take everything from me, but they hadn't succeeded. They had taken my job, my reputation, my financial security, but they hadn't taken my spirit. They hadn't taken my intelligence. They hadn't taken my resolve. And that, I realized, was something they could never take. The lease was the key. The weight of the realization hit me like a physical blow. They were sitting in my building, reaping the rewards of my hard work, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb beneath their feet. I smiled, a slow, predatory smile that hadn't touched my face in months. They thought they were untouchable, that they had all the power, but they were wrong. I had something they desperately needed, something they couldn't afford to lose. I pulled out the lease agreement, my fingers tracing the familiar clauses, the legal jargon now seeming like a roadmap to my revenge. I reread every word, every sentence, searching for any loophole, any advantage I could exploit. I saw it then, a small, seemingly insignificant detail that could unravel their entire empire. A clause stipulating that any major renovations or alterations to the building required my explicit written consent. And they had just completed a multi-million-dollar renovation to modernize the space, without so much as a courtesy call. My heart pounded in my chest, a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it. This was my chance. I started making calls, contacting contractors, architects, anyone who had been involved in the renovation project. I asked questions, subtle at first, then more direct, piecing together the details of the work, the materials used, the permits obtained. I discovered a series of irregularities, shortcuts taken, codes violated. The renovation was a disaster waiting to happen, a lawsuit in the making. I carefully documented everything, gathering evidence, building my case. I knew I had to be meticulous, thorough, leaving no room for error. They would fight dirty, I was sure of it, but I would be ready. I spent weeks poring over legal documents, consulting with lawyers, refining my strategy. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose, a cold, unwavering determination. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their downfall. I was the one holding the strings. The game had changed, and they had no idea what was coming. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn the true meaning of revenge. The day they tried to erase me was the day they signed their own doom. I smiled. I played their game, attending industry events, acting the part of the gracious, understanding former executive. They lapped it up, convinced I was broken, defeated. Little did they know, every handshake, every forced smile, every casual conversation was meticulously recorded, documented, and analyzed. I invested in a high-quality audio recorder, concealing it in my purse, capturing every word, every nuance, every slip-up they made. I became a student of their habits, their routines, their weaknesses. I learned their lunch schedules, their meeting times, their favorite watering holes. I observed their interactions with each other, the power dynamics, the hidden resentments. I discovered that beneath the veneer of success and camaraderie, there was a seething undercurrent of jealousy and backstabbing. They were a house of cards, waiting for the slightest breeze to topple them, and I was about to become that breeze. The company lawyer, a slick, arrogant man named Thompson, became a particular focus of my attention. I suspected he was the one who had orchestrated my dismissal, meticulously crafting the legal justification for their actions. I needed to find something on him, something that would expose his complicity and undermine his credibility. I hired a private investigator, a discreet, resourceful woman named Maria, to delve into his background, his finances, his personal life. It wasn't cheap, but it was an investment I was willing to make. The information Maria uncovered was explosive. Thompson had a history of ethical violations, shady business dealings, and a gambling problem that had left him deeply in debt. He was vulnerable, desperate, and easily manipulated. The renovations were my primary weapon. I needed irrefutable proof that they had violated the lease agreement and endangered the safety of their employees. I contacted a forensic architect, a specialist in building code violations, to conduct a thorough inspection of the premises. He spent days meticulously examining the structure, the electrical systems, the fire safety measures, uncovering a litany of deficiencies and shortcuts. The fire exits were improperly marked, the sprinkler system was inadequate, the electrical wiring was substandard, and the structural supports had been compromised. The building was a death trap, and they knew it. I also discovered that they had bribed the city inspector to sign off on the renovations, a blatant act of corruption that could land them all in prison. I obtained copies of the inspection reports, the permits, the invoices, building a rock-solid case against them. Securing the evidence wasn't easy. There were close calls, moments when I thought I'd been discovered. Once, while surreptitiously photographing documents in the city planning office, a security guard approached me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I feigned confusion, pretending to be a lost tourist, my heart pounding in my chest. He bought it, thankfully, but it was a chilling reminder of the risks I was taking. Another time, I overheard Sarah talking on the phone, mentioning my name, her voice dripping with venom. I quickly ducked behind a pillar, eavesdropping on the conversation. She was warning Thompson about my activities, urging him to take action to stop me. I realized then that they were aware of my investigation, that they were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. That's when I decided to shift my strategy. I couldn't afford to be predictable. I started spreading rumors, subtle hints about the lease violation, the bribery, the safety hazards, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of their employees, their clients, their investors. I knew that fear was a powerful motivator, that people would start to question their leadership, their competence, their integrity. I created an anonymous email address and sent carefully crafted messages to key individuals, providing just enough information to pique their interest, to trigger their own investigations. I knew that once the truth started to unravel, it would be impossible for them to contain it. The hardest part was maintaining my composure, acting as if nothing was amiss. I attended company events, smiling and nodding, engaging in polite conversation, while secretly plotting their downfall. It was a constant act, a performance that required every ounce of my willpower. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to confront them with their treachery, to expose their lies, but I knew that premature action would ruin everything. I had to be patient, methodical, waiting for the opportune moment to strike.
The anticipation was almost unbearable. I spent sleepless nights rehearsing my plan, visualizing the moment of their exposure, savoring the taste of their defeat. I knew that the consequences would be devastating, not just for them, but for everyone involved. Careers would be ruined, reputations tarnished, face the consequences of their actions. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Maria delivered the smoking gun, evidence that Thompson had been siphoning money from the company's accounts to pay off his gambling debts. It was the perfect leverage, the final nail in their coffin. I knew it was time. The day they finalized the merger, the deal that would make them all obscenely wealthy, was the day I would unleash my revenge. I prepared the documents, the evidence, the recordings, everything meticulously organized and ready for distribution. I contacted a journalist, a reputable investigative reporter known for his fearless pursuit of the truth, providing him with a preview of my findings. He was intrigued, eager to break the story. I knew that once it hit the headlines, there would be no turning back. The storm was coming, and they were completely unprepared. The merger announcement was set, a gala, the pinnacle of their ambition. Champagne flutes, backslapping executives, and the intoxicating scent of success. It was the perfect stage for their public execution. My plan was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. I would use their own arrogance against them, luring them into a false sense of security before pulling the rug out from under their feet. I sent Sarah a carefully worded email, congratulating her on the merger, praising her leadership, and hinting at my admiration for her achievements. I even offered to bring a special gift to the gala, a token of my supposed goodwill. The bait was set. She took it, hook, line, and sinker. Her response was dripping with condescension, accepting my offer with thinly veiled glee, clearly relishing the opportunity to parade her victory in front of my face. I could almost hear her cackling with delight. It fueled my resolve. The day of the gala arrived, a sweltering summer evening in the city. I spent hours meticulously preparing, transforming myself from a ghost into a vision of poised vengeance. I chose a stunning black dress, a figure-hugging masterpiece that exuded confidence and power. My hair was perfectly coiffed, my makeup flawless, my eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. I wanted them to see me, to really see me, to understand that I was not someone to be trifled with.
The special gift was carefully concealed in my purse, a USB drive containing all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past months. The lease violations, the bribery, the financial irregularities, Thompson's gambling debts, everything. It was a digital Pandora's box, ready to unleash chaos and destruction upon their carefully constructed world. As I walked into the ballroom, the air crackled with anticipation. The room was filled with the city's elite, power brokers and socialites, all eager to celebrate the merger and bask in the reflected glory of its architects. Sarah spotted me immediately, her eyes widening with a mixture of surprise and amusement. She glided towards me, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Well, well, well," she purred, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If it isn't the prodigal executive, I must say you look radiant, almost as if you haven't lost everything." I returned her smile, my eyes locking with hers. "Thank you, Sarah," I said smoothly. "I always believe in dressing for the occasion, and tonight the occasion calls for celebration. Wouldn't you agree?" She laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Indeed, a celebration of our success, our triumph, something you, unfortunately, will never understand." I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the scene, memorizing every detail. "Perhaps not, but I do understand the importance of sharing, and I have brought a little something to commemorate this special evening." I reached into my purse, pulling out the USB drive. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed with curiosity. "What's this?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "A gift," I replied, handing her the drive. "A token of my appreciation." She hesitated for a moment, then snatched the drive from my hand, examining it with a disdainful look. "I'm sure it's nothing we need," she said dismissively, "but thank you for the gesture." "Oh, I think you'll find it quite enlightening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Especially when you share it with everyone." I gestured towards the large screen behind the stage, where a slideshow of the company's achievements was being displayed. "Perhaps you could play it for all your guests. I'm sure they would be fascinated by its contents." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed, her smile vanishing. She realized then that something was terribly wrong. The realization dawned on her face, the blood draining from her cheeks. She took a step back, her hand trembling. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. "The truth, Sarah," I said, my voice now ringing with confidence. "The truth about your lies, your deceit, your corruption. The truth about the merger, the renovations, the backroom deals. The truth about everything." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, paralyzed with fear. The room began to spin. The music faded. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes staring at me, all wondering what was about to happen.
I walked to the exit and turned back one last time. I mouthed 2 words. "Checkmate, bitch." The journalist I contacted was already in place. He watched Sarah with laser focus, ready to expose them all. He knew what was coming. The only question now was, would Sarah be stupid enough to play the USB drive? The air hung thick with anticipation, a silent challenge hanging in the balance. Would Sarah call my bluff? Would she dismiss the USB drive as a hollow threat, clinging to her crumbling facade of success? Or would her curiosity, her arrogance, her insatiable need to prove her dominance compel her to unveil its contents before the assembled crowd? I didn't have to wait long to find out. I saw Thompson approach her, his face etched with concern, whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head, dismissing his worries with a wave of her hand. Her eyes, blazing with a mixture of defiance and desperation, locked onto mine one last time. Then, with a deliberate, theatrical flourish, she strode towards the stage. The slideshow of corporate accolades flickered behind her, a grotesque parody of the truth that was about to be revealed. She grabbed the microphone, her voice trembling slightly as she addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have a special surprise for you this evening, a little added insight into the secrets of our success." She gestured towards the USB drive in her hand, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "A former colleague has graciously provided us with a unique perspective on our journey. Let's share it with everyone, shall we?" The band stopped playing. The chatter died down. All eyes were on Sarah. A technician plugged the USB drive into the projector. The corporate slideshow vanished, replaced by a stark black screen. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd, a palpable sense of unease settling over the ballroom. Then the first image appeared,
A photograph of the building's blueprints, highlighted with red circles indicating the code violations, the structural deficiencies, the fire safety hazards. Gasps of shock and disbelief echoed through the room. Sarah's face paled, her confident facade beginning to crack. The next slide revealed copies of the bribed inspection reports, the forged signatures, the dates and amounts of the payoffs. Then came the audio recordings, snippets of Sarah and Thompson's conversations, their voices dripping with greed and contempt, plotting my demise, discussing the cover-up. The room was deathly silent, every word hanging in the air like a poisoned dart. And then the final blow, the evidence of Thompson's embezzlement, the bank statements, the gambling debts, the proof that he had been siphoning money from the company to fuel his addiction. His face crumbled, his eyes wide with terror. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate for escape. The journalist in the room was recording every second, his camera capturing the stunned faces, the whispered accusations, the unfolding drama. The room erupted in chaos. Accusations flew, fingers pointed, alliances shattered. Investors stormed out, their faces flushed with anger and betrayal. Employees looked on in stunned silence, their dreams of a secure future dissolving before their eyes. The police arrived, sirens wailing, to escort Thompson away in handcuffs. Sarah stood frozen on the stage, her world collapsing around her. Her career, her reputation, her entire life was in ruins. I watched from the doorway, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. The architect of my pain was now experiencing her own personal hell. As I turned to leave, our eyes met one last time. Her gaze was filled with hatred, with despair, with the chilling realization that she had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and utterly destroyed. She had tried to erase me, but instead, I had erased her. The fallout was swift and devastating. The merger was called off, the company's stock plummeted, and lawsuits piled up faster than they could be defended. Sarah was fired, disgraced, and shunned by the industry. Thompson faced criminal charges, his reputation forever tarnished. The company's name became synonymous with scandal and corruption, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and business schools. They lost everything, their wealth, their power, their status, their freedom, all gone, because they thought they could treat me like I was nothing, because they underestimated my resolve, because they chose greed over integrity, because they forgot that even the quietest voices can roar. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. It's the act of reclaiming what was stolen, of righting a wrong, of restoring balance to a world that has tilted on its axis. It's a reminder that actions have consequences, that betrayal has a price, and that justice, however delayed, will always find its way. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.